All right. So we're here tonight at the Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Collective, or today, wherever you are, for a very special reading by a poet all the way from Austin, Texas, Valerie Nies. I met Valerie in Megan Falley's Poems That Don't Suck course right at the start of the pandemic, and she quickly became one of my favorite poets. I can remember your Super Plus Tampon Frenemy poem as one of the first that stood out to me. Valerie's a poet and a comedian and a gluten enthusiast, as one should be, and has had poems in Rattle, Freeze Ray, Abandoned Journal, and many others. She's the author of the full-length Snacks for the Love Hungry, which is an excellent poem title, as well as a chapbook, Imaginary Frenemies. And she lives in Austin, Texas with her gray tabby Henry, and can be found at valerienies.com and at Valerie Nies, as in the things on your legs. Valerie, please read poems for us.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Melissa, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me here today. It's today where I am and tonight where you are. I'm going to read most of my poems from Snacks for the Love Hungry, and maybe a few newer ones. So I live in Austin, Texas, and this first poem I wrote because during a time where we have a sort of insane real estate market here. And I had some feelings about that. So this is called In This House, because there's a lot of signs outside homes here that say in this house and what people believe in. In this house, we believe Tom Brady will play football forever. We believe in crisp white linen, button-down family photos pulled up with bootstrapped dry cleaning privilege. We believe in naming our kids Gideon and Stella and decorating their rooms with elephant print teepees. We believe in building up an ultra-posh, sustainably sourced meat market while tearing down the family carniceria. We believe in living, laughing, and loving our leaf blowers. We believe in reclaiming wood, tinned fish, Basquiat's ideas, and this neighborhood as our own. We believe in hiding insecurities underneath pendant lights that illuminate our farmhouse dining room tables, shiplapping banality behind vases of bleached blonde stalks of wheat. We believe in Whole30, zero-escaped dog parks, and manifest destinying yoga. We believe in screaming into our wine o'clock pillows when we see the rising property taxes we don't believe we caused. We believe in paying our accountants to get us out of paying. This next poem I'm going to read is called He Asks About My Kinks. He asks about my kinks. Because I feel naked during these conversations, I start small with the lights turned off. Tell him, I like my hair pulled. He nods. Tell him I like dirty talk. Spank me, daddy, lick my geode. And then what, he asks. Because he is a sister and a Planned Parenthood bumper sticker on his fridge, I reveal fantasies I've never said aloud. Like what really rocks my clam is going to the Thai restaurant on South First with a 33-year-old video editor named Jeremy and not having to text my girlfriends my location in case I die. What pinches my nipples is getting caught with my legs, hugging his face in the middle of a downtown avenue under street lamps turned on bright for once to save women, instead of dimmed to save the city a few bucks. What wets my carpet is being blindfolded with a Future is Female t-shirt, while reruns of a sitcom about a peppy blonde bureaucrat who runs for office in Indiana air during the Law and Order SVU slot. Because there are no more stories of jealous husbands prying open their wives' skulls with happily never afters. Because the last time I had sex, I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because my boyfriend's eyes said, I deserve this, and you belong to me. And I didn't want a story I'd have to keep in the back of my nightstand, like a velvet satchel of trauma. I'd rather pull out a hot pink vibrator than a hot pink taser. It would be so hot to make a man my cuckold. Except instead of watching me fuck another guy, he's watching me watch edgy white male filmmakers write something they know instead of yet another fetishized rape scene. And then maybe I tickle his ear and whisper, 1 in 6 women, or maybe it's 4, until he begs me to stop, stop, stop. I have nieces. Like that's his safe word. Um, so those 2 poems are this book, Snacks for the Love Hungry. Can I see it? Okay. Is named after a poem in the book. It also is how I divided, is how I organized the book. I organized the book into different sections that each have a theme. This theme is sort of like the angry section of the book. And I named each of those themed sections after a particular snack. So the snack for this angry section of the book is called Salty Black Licorice. So that was fun. It's fun to organize a book. Okay, this next one is less angry. And I'm a white woman, so I've read a lot of books about attachment theory, and that's sort of attachment theory. If you're not aware of what it is, it probably means you're in a successful, healthy relationship. But basically, how we act in our romantic relationships sometimes is influenced by things we have little control over, like how secure we felt when we were babies, before we had our developing brains could really understand what was going on. That can sometimes influence how we show up later. So that's a little bit of background that will help understand this poem, which is called Earth Has Attachment Issues. During its infancy, Earth wasn't held for as long as it needed by the Milky Way. I mean, it wasn't anybody's fault. The galaxy has 500 billion celestial bodies to tend to, wailing for milk. Perhaps if Earth were hugged by rings like Saturn, or if God hadn't walked out, or it had not suffered from effects of solar nebula postpartum depression, we inhabitants would float untethered. But Earth has attachment issues. Love-craved clinginess, so encompassing that it uses gravity to latch the boots of 28 billion human feet to its surface, root 3 trillion trees to its core, dock maritime vessels to ports, bathtub shelter 2-ton blue whales, draw dragonflies to meadows, seduce city skyscrapers, captivate crickets, attract apples to the ground, enchant everyone to stay a little longer, planted in bed, hit snooze, snuggle, more please, play hooky, roll beneath the covers like meteorites tumbling their way home. So a lot of my poetry incorporates references to pop culture. Um, and this is one of those poems. It's a poem from a situation from my teenagehood. It's called Eddie Vedder Saved Me from a Cult. Not one of those fun tantric sex ones either. No, I was 14 years old when lured inside a temple of dogs, acceptance-seeking adolescents who hadn't yet discovered drugs, so sought instead nirvana at a Pentecostal church. This was the year of fitting in Guess jeans, eating fat-free Yoplait, gossiping on the bandroom steps, and comparing my thighs to those of every Alice and Crash Diet chains. The year of privately practicing pentatonic scales on my used Ovation with the amp turned low. This was the year I, a girl who had never been kissed, signed a red index card vowing to abstain from sex until marriage, even though all I wanted was to bone every Josh who made up the hormone of Nordic blonde teenage boys tambourining on stage in a church basement with sounds rock and roll adjacent. Tall boy arms cradled a bass, Stocky Viking slouched at a trap set, smacking drumsticks, and a bandana-wearing singer's hands caressed a Stratocaster I wished were my face. Every Wednesday night, I exalted this junior high temptation trinity. Sorry about that. Crossed, uh, uh, every Wednesday night, I exalted this junior high temptation trinity. Crossed my fingers I might flirt. Prayed I'd find the right words to make just one Josh notice me, become my boyfriend, take me to the movies where we could speak in tongues. And if it was not God's will for me to experience love, Holy Mother of Mary Janes, could I at least possess the same confidence as adolescent boys in a Christian band, who even after strumming a wrong chord or missing a beat, still smiled at the audience, a flock of meat puppets? Instead, I meekly played Led Zeppelin in my parents' basement, an empty sound garden. In the 9 months I attended youth group, I played Enter Sandman 99 times, but spoke to only one male, Pastor Bill, a 30-year-old who had moved to my hometown in North Dakota from Seattle to save confused Midwestern teenagers. To Pastor Bill, grunge rock Mecca was Babylon, and Eddie Vedder, Satan's minion. To prove my devotion to God, he requested I hand over my CDs as an offering, sacrificial lambs. Like Job, I deliberated, listened to Animal, searching for blasphemy. Every riff was a revelation. Listened to DC Talk, gifted from the pastor, searching for redemption. If indie rock is so evil, why is it the only thing that made me feel alive? If God were so great, heavens to Betsy, why did he suck so hard at lyrics? Like attempting to learn the solo from Freebird, I became bored with church, forsook Pastor Bill and the chorus of Josh's, surrendered my hot pink Lisa Frank-styled teen Bible for rock and roll, drugs, and sex, which entered my life in that order. Substituted writing vows of abstinence in my teens for writing down my number in my 20s on beverage napkins in bars with jukeboxes singing Yellow Ledbetter, turning to troubled musicians I'd later have premarital sex with because I finally found a compelling opening line. Let me tell you the story of how Eddie Vedder saved me from a cult. Thank you for bearing with that. And I'm so sorry for my little calendar notification. Okay. So I live in Austin, Texas now, but I grew up in a place called Bismarck, North Dakota. North Dakota is like the sticks. It is a really not well populated place. There was nothing really to do there growing up. There was no artsy community. There were no poetry readings. And so after I hung out in church basements when I was an adolescent, I found other ways, as I alluded to have fun. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Graduating from Sundays. Somewhere in South Bismarck, on some November day, at some girlfriend's, boyfriend's, unseen older brother's trailer house, 6 of us sugar speed sit on a smashed velour couch, electricity turned off. 2 warm Schlitz beers buzzing from a dark refrigerator glide down my smooth tulip throat, split my brain into hot fudge and freeze, candying conversation. Confidence sprinkled on me for the first time, flirting with maraschino, cherry-faced boys who act like they are men, laughing in waves like mountains and valleys of whipped cream. So that is a story of the first drink I ever had. And I don't think people remember the first drink they ever had unless they have problems later on with alcohol, which I did. I haven't drank for many, many years. And this next poem is sort of about that. It's another pop culture reference. It's a series of haiku. Haiku to my imaginary friend, Mark Marin. Tender interviews, extemporaneous truth, honest guitar riffs. In the beginning, I listened to whining rants because I relate. It's 2012, the year I stopped drinking booze. You are a fellow. Happy hour headphones playing WTF one day at a time. We have in common sobriety and coffee, comedy and cats, brimming with anger, fear, and jealousy toward one Louis C.K. You disarm each guest with one simple inquiry. What does your dad do? Farmed and factoried and cleaned, fixed all things broken. I'd share this with you, expect us to laugh. Two people who talk too much, in need of repair. Another poem I'm going to read is about work, different kind of work than I currently am doing. When I was growing up, my dad did work in a factory, and children of the people who worked in the factory had the opportunity to do summer work there, and you would get paid a lot of money to do that. So you can't see me, but I'm not well suited to manual labor. I'm 4'11". I'm petite. I have no upper body strength. This is a story about me working in an assembly line at a factory. It's called Collecting Cash at the Phallic Factory. It's the summer before my sophomore year in college, and I'm sheathed in blue-collared testosterone eyes inside a cement cube. A factory of men who smell like cigarettes, toxic citrus gojo hand soap, and no means yes. I work 12-hour days on an assembly line in August heat alongside stubbly men who think I'm there for them, and not the $16 an hour I will save to pay my living expenses in the fall at a state university where I will write essays about Mary Wollstonecraft and her vindication on the rights of women to work beside men equally, putting parts together for excavation equipment, pistons and heads and seals and shafts to build masculine mechanical dinosaurs that bore holes in earth, penetrate earth for urban development. Men who drive big-wheeled trucks silhouetted in window decals of impossibly busty women with extreme nipples and cartoon hair with ends that never split. I hide myself in dialogue. Tell the men, I love Black Sabbath. I love the Sabbath. Start every sentence with my boyfriend. My boyfriend lifts weights at the gym too. My boyfriend likes when I wear a ponytail. My boyfriend bought me pepper spray. A short man chases me with a spray bottle to splash water on my chest, like we are in an episode of Three's Company. I hide myself in the baggiest cotton t-shirts, so the men will think I am one of them. Forget they thought I'm here to tempt them from their wives or temper their loneliness from the wives who left them. Tell them to turn up the volume. I love the cars, I say as they drool and watch me shove rods inside hydraulic cylinders. They fantasize I am pushing them into some kind of metal fleshlight. Hide myself in kindness and gifts, pull out from my igloo cooler at lunch by the lockers, confidence, candy, Twizzlers, and Kit Kats to distract them like throwing bread at ducks, until one day a tall one corners me, tells me he wants to watch me suck on a lollipop, whip licorice with my tongue, choke on chocolate. And I'd love to say I called HR or that I quit my job, but I did neither. And I could give you a file cabinet of excuses. It was 1999. My dad worked at the same plant. I didn't want to find out whose side he'd take. All the women who came before me had it worse. I didn't know I could find mentors in the generation after mine, the younger women who would not put up with, who would not fumble in hot rage, would not boys will be boys away their comfort, would not stay silent, would not. 'Cause Um, let's see. How much time do I have left?
I mean, as much as you want, like maybe 15 more minutes.
Okay. Okay. Got it. That's good. We're right on track. Okay. So the next poem, thank you very much. I'm gonna read is about body image. I don't know. Surprising. I find my own poem in my book. Okay. It took me 39 years. Some babies belt out affirmations as their mothers push them through the womb and grow up feeling worthy. I spent a I spent a Taibo teenagehood figuring out the best way to shrink my thighs in the dryer. Ran a track of laps in my 20s and wore Forever 21 flare skirts to distract from my meaty quadriceps. Appreciating myself is something I schedule 2 alerts in my phone to remind me to do and then ignore. Loving my thighs, crafty tongue, too short frame, imperfect impulsivity, hairy vulva, my belly where English toffee and dark chocolate built a sprawling suburban mall. My fear, my meanness never came naturally. It's easier to do Pilates and 21-day fitness and blame the patriarchy and measure quarter cups of high protein, low fat Greek yogurt and wear shoes that fuck up my feet to make me 3 inches taller. If loving my thighs were chess, scolding them while wearing a one-piece swimsuit is tic-tac-toe. I'm the only person I ever needed to cover a mirror in post-it notes to trick myself into loving. My insides crave a tyrant. It only took 39 years. And hearing a man for whom I offered too much of my love to tell me he loved my thighs. His validation is all it took for me to permit myself to remove the post-its so I could admire my own damn legs. And for that, I hate myself. Okay, I'm gonna read another poem that's about travel. There's a section in my book inspired by being other places, which I find to be very spiritual, because I have to be present when I'm traveling in places that are unfamiliar to me because I can't, because I have to figure out where I am, which means I can't just distract myself by being on my phone. So this is a poem about Mexico City. Mexico City is sinking. The uniformed men playing organ grinders in her historic center hold out their tan hats for tips in front of her blue and white house of cracked ceramic tiles, slanted floors, and rocky foundations, playing whiny music no one asked for. I walk like a cautious hen on uneven sidewalks. I've fallen in many cities and I can't stop looking at the exposed tree roots, lifting up asphalt like botanical Hercules. In my hotel, I read about urban forestry while eating chicharron marinated in Valentina and lime juice, a hot warning in my mouth. It's because of earthquakes, the experts say in a scientific paper from 1986. That's why the city is strangled in tree roots. I'm no scientist. I prefer to think in myths. Maybe the city got too cocky, and now, as karmic punishment, she sinks 20 inches a year. I mean, the Aztecs built a city on mush after the universe told them to, after they asked the gods for a sign undeniable. Show us an eagle eating a rattlesnake on top of a cactus. It sounds ridiculous, but I too have read a horoscope, asked the universe to bless me in feathers, to tell me I am loved. Reaching all the time upward is exhausting, and maybe it's easier to lean into Mictlan. Mexico City is sinking, like all the coolest swamp towns, smelling vaguely of shit, sewage stewing barely beneath cobblestone. Venice's columned palaces shrink under sea tapestries. The Atlantic can't wait to swallow Miami's Art Deco goddesses. New Orleans, a bowl of hurricaned magnolias. It's hard not to judge history's fools. Why erect a home on waves? But I too have built a grand thing on mud and have a hard time letting go of a bad idea. The next poem I'm going to read is explores the idea of what would happen if one thing were different about your life. How would you maybe have become a different person if that were true? And it's called "My Parents Almost Named Me Heather," and it's a ghazal. A guzzle? It's a guzzle. My parents almost named me Heather. I'd have a medicine cabinet free of expired Advil had my parents named me Heather. She'd look smooth in bikinis, never regret her words. Sometimes I'd rather be Heather, paying housekeepers to mop her floor, flying first class to Turks and Caicos, dancing elegant salsa. Unlike me, all bounce and wobble, she's carefree Heather. Persuasive, long-necked, and knowledgeable about cryptocurrency. The one at the tapas bar to figure out the bill. Yes, we agree, Heather. Pushing her cart past the bakery's lemon ricotta cookies, escaping to Kale Isle, weighing herself each morning, netting daily losses. See Heather's thin thighs, perfect eyebrows, minimalist apartment, books organized by color, a volume of Shakespeare's collected works thoroughly read. Gee, Heather, where do you find the time? Her friends ask. You're so different from Valerie, so put together. She answers, it's all in my name, bitches. Behold Queen Bee Heather. So yeah, my parents almost did name me Heather. I'm happy they didn't. I don't think it would have been good for me. Let's see, what else? So yeah, I'll read another one about North Dakota. This is called A Cherry That Chokes. I grew up in a narrow ranch house set on a flat 2-acre square within the empty rectangle of North Dakota. Our backyard lined with a thicket of chokecherry shrubs, a windbreak of wild green guardians that, like a cheap window, permitted all the snowy prairie gusts entry. During summer, the chokecherry shrubs bloomed white flowers, which turned into crimson berries, a surprise to my 8-year-old eyes. This hadn't happened since the year before. By late August, red berries ripened brown. My mother and I picked chokecherries, plopped them into buckets, popped them into our mouths, anticipating strawberry shortcake, a jelly donut in fruit form. Instead, I pucker my cheeks, wish I could spit them out. A first lesson in lowering expectations. They whispered to my taste buds, try one more, maybe they'll get better. The cigarette of fruit. A different August, maybe I am 10. I gobble a handful of tart marbles, let them roll on my tongue. The skin sticks to the inside of my cheeks. I swallow the fruit, left with a mouth full of pits and the mystery of how to dispose them. My teeth coated in dark chocolate, if dark chocolate tasted like dirt. I remember, I hate chokecherries, but every late summer I'd eat them again and again. Maybe this time would be different. The addiction of rationalization. My mother grew up on a farm in the 1960s. Candy and treats were sparse, so the annual chokecherry harvest was Woodstock. We didn't know any better, she tells me. When I visit North Dakota, I shop for a gift for my house sitter. The small boutique, empty, except for rows of chokecherry jams and syrups. Defeated labels on the bottles as if they've accepted. We know we only taste good when you drown us in sugar. A healing chokecherry tea to make one want to stay sick. Chokecherries fermented into wine to help one forget they're consuming chokecherries. A hard fruit from a hard place. It can be eaten. Its Missouri River sunsets can be enjoyed, but it takes effort. Tablespoons of sweetener, snowblowers pushed for blocks, abdomens wrapped in layers of fleece wool coated in nylon, heads turned the other way when reading their neighbors' political yard signs. I left because I know better. To me, North Dakota is a bitter berry. So, yeah, no one from North Dakota is ever going to ask me to be a poet laureate for their state. Um, it's been a while since I read that. Uh, this could explain why my mother hasn't finished my book. Um, she's not a poet. Okay, I'll read a new one. This is called Summer Home. So now instead of North Dakota, I live in Austin, Texas, where it's like I don't know what the equivalent is in Celsius, but it's extremely hot here all the time, basically for 9 months, and it's unbearably, disgustingly hot. This is called Summer Home. The pendulum sway of a hammock tangos with garden tomato on my tongue and a nose full of night blooming jasmine. Inside, a guitar solo pedals through 1970s beefy speakers. We are outside underneath a hot amethyst sky, undefined, the promise of no promises. An orchestra of cicadas cue my lips to that hopeful hollow spot where neck meets collarbone, an ideal campsite. And this is going to be my last poem. It's something I wrote recently. It's called Pole Dancing in Orthopedic Wedges. Well, since it's my last poem, I'll do a little introduction because I wrote a one-woman show recently about this idea of getting older, and it's a comedic one-woman show, but this is sort of like the poetic version of that show. And we know a lot about what it looks like when men have a midlife crisis because it's depicted in pop culture through like Alexander Payne movies like Sideways. And this is like, but we don't really know what it looks like for women other than like maybe stereotypes that they're going to plastic surgeons. So this is sort of a story of my midlife crisis. Pole dancing in orthopedic wedges. I'm a 44-year-old woman in the midst of a midlife crisis. A fat challenge to sit solo at the brasserie, order the steak frites, and a faux French 75. They call them mocktails, but I'm way less of a mockery now. I still lose myself, but now it's in windshield wipers. The same way Yeats wouldn't shut up about sorrow, I can't stop taking photos of raindrops and summer solstice shadows of ash leaves on the sidewalk. Nothing about this is a film about a pudgy man's quest to find himself while on a Pinot Noir road trip. I fell off a man's lofted twin bed and in love with his mid-century lamps. I allow myself to be felt up by a symmetrical 28-year-old Parisian against my car door outside a farm-to-table's organic garden. Almost buy a flight to Montreal. Let the honey golden couple who know what they want buy me dinner. Some women want Pinterest picket fences. All I want is for this middle-aged man I'm sleeping with to follow me on Instagram. And if he did, I would immediately cancel the free trial. They said I'd lose collagen, but look, nothing about this is sad. I spend Saturday afternoons dancing burlesque in champagne granny panties, a lesser magnificent whale, comfortable in aerosols, comfortable in SPF clothing, comfortable admitting maybe monogamy, my ideas, are a mark. When I was a kid, I dropped out of ballet, couldn't look at myself in the mirror. It was a tantris. Yesterday, I cried in front of my boss and was awarded a promotion, the midst of a renaissance. Nothing about this is a candy apple Corvette. So, thank you so much, Red Wheelbarrow Collective.
Woo! Thank you, Valerie. Can we quickly clap for Valerie, please?
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, that was spectacular. I love your new poem as well. Thank you. What a journey. So good to get to hear you reading all of these. Does anybody here have any questions or comments that they'd like to voice? I'm curious, your last, like the last poem, you're talking about this being the poetic version of your one-woman comedy show. How do you find the comedy and the poetry? Like, are there other examples where you've kind of explored things from both angles? Or, I mean, I do feel your poems have some comedic stuff in them, obviously, and that was, yeah. What's the relationship like?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's really intertwined. I just feel the need to write about something, right? And you can tell like it's really like inward. A lot of my work is inward and exploring myself. And I feel like that's like what my comedy has always been too. One of my comedy mentors has said, like Jerry Seinfeld is like his whole deal is exploring like what's the deal with this tiny little observation. And my comedy mentor was like, you're sort of like your own, you're trying to figure out yourself. So it's like this journey of trying to get to know myself. Uh, so yeah, I'm a woman in my 40s and it looks different than what I thought society told me it should look like. And it's actually a lot more fun. I thought it was going to be a drag, but I'm more confident now. So I end up just writing first. And a lot of times I'll think like, is this a poem or is this going to be a joke? And I think most of the time it can be both things. And I get to lean into, I would say that like we talked about in Megan Falley's course, Poems That Don't Suck, clouds is an example of like descriptive language. And that's not like my natural, that's not the natural place that I work from. Um, but poetry allows me to be able to explore that more. Some of the ideas that there's less of that kind of cloudy descriptive language in comedy. But then in comedy, I get to be much clearer and like, here's I mean, obviously we want our poetry to be clear, but I get to elaborate and be like, it's going to turn into a half an hour show. And I can use visuals and other things in this theater setting that I can't necessarily do written on one page. So a lot of times these days, I'm writing a joke version of a poem too, and vice versa.
That's awesome. That's very interesting. And yeah, really nice to be able to like kind of see it from two angles, but it's still the same thing. Makes sense
Especially
that
if
they're
it's
so linked.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, especially
Yeah, that
like about
exploring
if,
yourself.
if it's exploring like some sort of, um place, maybe not. Like I don't have jokes about Mexico City, really. But if it's exploring me, it does end up being both.
Cool. Anyone else who wants to say or ask something? Jacques.
Wow, Valerie, I just loved your reading. Um I, I think I'm in danger of becoming incoherent. I really loved it a lot. What I loved was I mean the poems were I found the poems quite funny. I mean I found they were sort of wryly funny, and I felt that you were moving in, you were kind of zeroing in on emotion and then looking at yourself from the outside and then moving back in. It was fascinating and wonderful. I would love to hear the joke version because I felt this was the they felt very, they didn't feel like something was missing. What am I asking?
Um,
Do you know beforehand whether it's going to be funny? I suppose not. Do you just start in the middle and see what happens, see how it comes out?
that's a great question. I'm not trying to make my poetry funny. It happens to be that way. I started writing comedy. Well, that's not true. I started writing poetry in college. Comedy didn't exist. I mean, it did exist, but like it wasn't accessible. Like now you can just get a YouTube channel. I'm from Gen X, so like YouTube didn't exist when I was, Um, but then I started writing comedy first and then really just started writing poetry again in the pandemic after taking all of these workshops. And I
Oh,
mentioned before we started the reading that they're really similar. We value brevity in poetry, we value brevity in comedy, we value like the right kind of word, the element of surprise. And so I
the
guess,
punchline.
yeah, and I feel like I have to be self-deprecating.
Mm,
I don't have to. I mean, I'm like, okay, it's just makes me feel better to like to think about like if I'm writing about the past, which I was doing a lot in 2020 because we couldn't go anyplace. So it was like looking inward and like, why was that girl so embarrassed of her thighs? And it's interesting when I do a reading, I'm like, my thighs come up in so many poems. And so like it was a big part of my life, I guess. So like, just like approaching life with curiosity and humor.
yeah.
And when I'm thinking about the past, I think that's like the one way that we try to process
And
our
and,
emotions.
and taking down discourses that take themselves too seriously a little bit.
Perhaps I'm not, I don't think I'm intentionally trying to do this stuff. It's just how it comes out for me.
Um, Influences in terms of comedy, like people that you love, people
Well,
who,
my first comedic influence that I loved was also really great at writing and rhetoric, and that was George Carlin. Um,
yeah.
but there's all kinds of comedians that I love. I love Tig Notaro. I love Maria Bamford. I love um, Trevor Noah. I feel like he's a really amazing writer. I love Pete Holmes is very positive. Um, and I think that can be hard. I think it's easy to lean into anger
Hmm.
and be funny, but it's harder to like be enlightened and try to be like on this path of like hope and joy and still be funny. But yeah, I like a ton of comedians. I couldn't even list them all.
Um,
And I love funny poets. Like I love Billy Collins. I love Ron Padgett. Yeah.
I, I look forward to your book and I look forward to the company. Is there a way we can get, I mean, I'm just asking so much, but is there a way to get, is there a way that we can, do
Oh,
you
to
have
order my
like
book.
videos, comedy videos like on
Oh,
YouTube?
comedy videos. Yes, yes. If you go to valerienies.com, you can see videos. I did record my one woman show, but I haven't put it up yet because there's a lot of material. I'm trying to write a poem about a threesome, which is tricky, you guys. Anyway, these are things that I never was able to explore until my midlife crisis. And suddenly everybody's like, I'm like, what? My everything is saggy and like falling apart, yet you become attractive to a lot of people, or that has been my experience, at least in the last year. Anyway, I talk about that in the one woman show, and my parents are living and I don't want them to ever see that. So like I would love to put my one woman show up. Great. Yeah. Like, yeah. But there is another one woman show that is accessible from my website, valerienies.com, which I'll put in the chat. And that is about attachment. And that's one that I did a few years ago. And a breakup, attachment theory and a breakup.
Put my name all over it. Thank you. You've been very generous. Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. Okay, I've got two more hands. Francis, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question. I don't know if it has been asked before, but just something that's crossed my mind is hearing Valerie talking about comedy. First of all, thank you, Valerie, for your readings. Really enjoyed the Paul Dance poem. Quite interesting. So, does comedy inspire you to write poetry? Does it happen that when you perform or like when you have your comedy and it's also inspired you to write some of your poems or just poetry in general?
I'm sorry, what was the question was, how's poetry can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
So yeah, the question is, does comedy inspires you to write poetry?
Um, that's a great question. I don't think it does. Well, okay, I'll just tell you an example of like what inspires me. The last thing that inspired me, I don't think it's necessarily comedy, but I think it's so I had a wasp's nest under my patio. And I live in a place where I can like I used to have to I don't know. I'm a woman with means now, so I can afford pest control. So, so my pest control guy was coming, and I thought it was going to be like a 2-day affair. Like he was going to have to spray the wasps, and then they were all going to have to die. And then I shouldn't be saying this because Melissa's an animal lover, and I killed wasps, you guys. So, because I didn't like looking at them, and I was afraid of them. But I thought it was going to be a whole thing, like a 24-hour ordeal, and then the pest guy was going to have to come back to knock it off. And he came and he just sprayed it and immediately knocked the wasp's nest off with a broom and and scooped it up and it was gone and I never didn't have to worry about it. But then I was outside writing because I write outside and that's why I needed a wasp-free environment. And you know, the wasps that weren't in the nest were coming back. They were coming back because they wanted to go hang out in their home. They probably had food for the baby wasps. And it was so sad to me and devastating that like I was like, shit, now I can't work now. I have this emotion that I'm feeling about this wasp that I like displaced. And do I have to write a poem about this? So that's the last thing that inspired me. And I feel like it's sort of funny. Maybe I'll talk about that on stage too. I don't know if that answers your question.
Wow, yeah, yeah, thanks. That's quite interesting. It's in a way interlinked, Yeah, interesting. Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Francis. And then Ed, over to you for a question.
Hey. Well, thank you, Valeria. I really enjoyed your reading. I think what I appreciated about your poems was the adventurousness and your honesty and incisiveness. And I was thinking about, the other avenues that you take with your poetry, like the poems about place. I love the poem about Mexico, or New Mexico, Mexico City is sinking. Um, and the poem where you tackle um, yeah, gender, what would you say, yeah, power politics, essentially. And yeah, so I like those meanderings in other directions too, as much as the funny stuff. And if I had a question, it's sort of from the way you bring in pop culture. So I love the musical references, for example. Do you have a lot of fun with that? What is your relationship to pop culture? How do you bring those things in a way that sort of satisfies you that it's working in the poem? Or yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll tell you a couple of like just how some of them. I have a poem where about Bette Midler. I have another poem about Henry Winkler. I don't know if you know who those people are, Bette Midler and Henry Winkler, but they're like very well known, you know, movie stars here in the US. And they came because they're in poems because I think a lot of my poetry, I mean, you can tell if a lot of it's about me, is it sometimes comes out of stuff that I'm talking about in therapy. And so one of my therapists was like, one of them, I've got multiple ones. That's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true too. This is from one that I was working with a while ago. She was like, who would your ideal mother be if you could visualize who your ideal mother would be? And so for a long time, I've had this image of like Bette Midler being my cheerleader and being my ideal mother, and Henry Winkler is like my ideal father. So that's kind of how those two people came in. I will say that I think that like that Eddie Vedder poem, there's a bunch of like, it's very Gen X. It's very like grunge, Nirvana, like the references. I think it's like very gimmicky now when I reread it. But I read it today and I've read it at other readings because I think it's also sort of long, but I think it just does narrative kind of well. And it just sets up kind of like, oh, this just says a lot. This time period says a lot about like kind of how I ended up, what I was preoccupied with then, what I'm still preoccupied with now. And I guess because like I'm surrounded by pop culture, it doesn't seem so hard to incorporate that like that. I love Mary Oliver, but I just can't write about geese, but I can. I don't know if I'll ever. I love being in nature. I love bird watching, but it's never gonna be like one of her poems, it's never gonna be like what Ada Limon can do with nature. Do I love those poets? 100%, absolutely. But I feel like what comes to me is Instagram, talking about like really like where we are today or where I am today, which is often on a screen being shown celebrities and that kind of content.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Ed. All right, I see we're getting close to when you've got to get going. So anyone with a last minute question or comment? And otherwise, I can say I don't know if you're selling books directly. I can't remember if I bought your book from you or from your publisher. I think I bought it from your publisher.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, you
so.
can buy it from worldstagepress.com, which I'll put in the chat.
But if you're shipping internationally yourself, we can buy from you as well. For those who are not in the States, which I think is everyone here, except you.
I am currently, I do not have author copies at this time. So I'm not current, that could change in the future, but right now I'm not. But these people can.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here with us, for reading, for answering all the questions. It's been such a joy and a privilege to get to know you through your poems more again and to share this space with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was like exactly what my heart needed. Thank you.